After my CEO wife divorced me and fired me, I turned to my assistant and said, "Fire them all." Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we begin today's story, I would like to ask for one small favor. If you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with powerful emotions and unforgettable moments, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you will always be among the first to know whenever we upload a new video. It only takes a second, it is completely free, and your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories to audiences around the world. We sincerely appreciate every single one of you. We would also love to know where you are watching from, so please leave the name of your city or country in the comments below. It is always a pleasure to see viewers joining us from every corner of the world. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Now, without any further delay, let us return to our main character and begin today's story. The moment everyone applauds your downfall is often the moment they miss the truth standing right in front of them. Marcus Bennett stood at the far end of the executive conference room while the afternoon sun stretched across the polished walnut table, turning every crystal glass into a mirror that reflected dozens of silent faces. No one reached for their coffee anymore. No one pretended to review the quarterly reports stacked neatly beside their tablets. Every eye remained fixed on the woman at the head of the table. Vanessa Bennett had spent the last 6 years transforming Bennett Technologies into one of Chicago's fastest-growing software companies, and today she wore the confidence of someone who believed nothing in the room could surprise her. She folded a document with deliberate precision before sliding it across the table. "Sign it," she said, her voice calm enough to make the words feel even colder. Marcus lowered his eyes to the first page. Divorce petition. Beneath it rested another document carrying the company logo he had watched evolve from a simple sketch into a nationally recognized brand. Employment termination notice. Around the table, several executives exchanged restrained smiles, careful not to appear disrespectful while still enjoying the spectacle unfolding before them. Vanessa leaned back in her chair and clasped her hands together. "This company needs leadership without distractions," she said. "Our personal relationship ended months ago. It is time for the business to move forward as well." Marcus studied her face for a long second. He searched for hesitation, regret, or even a flicker of uncertainty, but found only determination. Without arguing, he reached for the pen resting beside the documents. The scratching sound of ink against paper echoed through the unusually quiet room. A few people shifted comfortably in their seats as though witnessing an inevitable conclusion rather than the collapse of a marriage and a career. When he finished signing both papers, Marcus carefully placed the pen back exactly where he had found it. He stood, buttoned his navy jacket, and quietly collected the small cardboard box waiting beside the conference room door. Inside rested little more than a framed photograph from the company's first office, a leather notebook worn smooth at the edges, and a coffee mug that still carried the faded slogan from their first product launch. Vanessa did not look at the photograph. She simply nodded toward human resources, already waiting outside to escort him from the building. Marcus thanked them with a polite smile that confused everyone watching. There was no anger, no pleading, no accusation. As the elevator doors closed behind him, the sounds of celebration upstairs faded into silence. He walked through the marble lobby where employees glanced up before quickly looking away, uncertain whether to offer sympathy or avoid eye contact altogether. Outside, the cool Chicago breeze carried the distant hum of evening traffic. Marcus paused on the sidewalk, slipped his phone from his pocket, and dialed a number he had not used in weeks. The call connected almost immediately. "I was wondering when you would call," a composed voice answered. Marcus looked back once at the towering headquarters bearing the company name in polished steel letters. His expression never changed. "Be ready," he said quietly. "Tomorrow begins." He ended the call, placed the phone back into his pocket, and walked toward the parking garage while the people inside the building celebrated a victory they did not yet understand. Marcus drove past the familiar skyline without turning on the radio, letting the steady rhythm of evening traffic replace the noise that had filled the conference room only an hour earlier. The cardboard box rested on the passenger seat exactly where he had placed it, untouched since leaving the office. When he finally pulled into the underground garage of a modest downtown apartment building, nothing about the place suggested wealth or influence. It was a quiet building with clean brick walls, a small fitness room that rarely stayed busy, and neighbors who greeted one another without recognizing names from business magazines. Marcus carried the box upstairs, unlocked the apartment, and stepped into a space that reflected discipline rather than luxury. The shelves held history books, biographies of great entrepreneurs, and framed photographs from charity events instead of corporate celebrations. He set the box on the dining table and slowly removed the old coffee mug, the faded photograph, and the leather notebook before placing them neatly beside one another. His phone remained silent for almost 20 minutes until it vibrated once. The screen displayed only one name: Evelyn Carter. She had served as his executive assistant for years, although almost no one inside Bennett Technologies understood the full scope of her responsibilities. Marcus answered immediately. "Everything is ready," she said in her calm, measured voice. "The meeting has been confirmed for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." Marcus walked toward the living room window overlooking the Chicago River, watching the lights shimmer across the dark water. "Has anyone noticed?" he asked. "No," Evelyn replied. "Everyone believes today's events unfolded exactly as expected." Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. "Good." She paused for a brief moment before continuing. Several board members called after the announcement. They asked whether they should intervene. Marcus looked toward the city where thousands of office lights still glowed against the evening sky. "Tell them to wait until tomorrow. They will understand," Evelyn answered without hesitation. After ending the call, Marcus opened the leather notebook resting on the table. Between handwritten pages filled with strategic notes sat a slim black envelope. He carefully removed a polished metal access card that carried no company logo, only a small silver emblem that almost nobody had ever seen. It was never displayed in public meetings, never attached to his office badge, and never mentioned in interviews. He slipped the card into the inside pocket of his jacket before walking into a spare bedroom that appeared almost empty except for a secure fireproof cabinet standing against one wall. A fingerprint scan unlocked the heavy door with a soft mechanical click. Inside rested organized folders, sealed agreements, and a simple leather portfolio. Marcus opened it, revealing documents bearing signatures from investors, founding partners, and legal counsel dating back nearly a decade. At the very bottom lay the original incorporation papers of Bennett Technologies. His own signature appeared first. Vanessa's appeared much later. Marcus closed the portfolio without lingering on the past. He returned everything exactly where it belonged and locked the cabinet once more. Before going to bed, he ironed a charcoal suit, polished a pair of black dress shoes, and placed both beside the bedroom door as though preparing for an ordinary business meeting. Across the city, celebration dinners continued as executives toasted what they believed was a bold new era under Vanessa's complete control. They laughed freely, convinced the last obstacle had finally disappeared. None of them realized that the most important meeting in the company's history had not taken place that afternoon inside the executive conference room. It was scheduled for the following morning, and only a handful of people knew who would be sitting at the head of the table when the doors quietly opened. The following morning arrived without fanfare, wrapped in the cool gray light that settled over downtown Chicago before the city fully awakened. Marcus Bennett left his apartment carrying nothing except a slim leather portfolio and the same quiet confidence that had carried him through years of difficult decisions. There were no reporters waiting outside, no luxury car collecting him from the curb, and no audience to witness where he was going. A simple black sedan pulled to the entrance exactly on time. Evelyn Carter stepped out from the driver's seat instead of waiting for him to open the door himself. She greeted him with a respectful smile that reflected familiarity rather than ceremony. "Good morning, sir," she said. Marcus nodded as he entered the vehicle. "Has everyone arrived?" Evelyn eased into traffic without hesitation. "Every board member is already inside. Legal counsel arrived 30 minutes ago. The independent auditors are reviewing the final reports. They are waiting for you before the meeting officially begins." Marcus looked through the window as the city passed by. Office workers hurried toward train stations carrying coffee cups while delivery trucks unloaded supplies along busy sidewalks. It looked like every other weekday in Chicago, yet he knew this morning would quietly reshape the future of a company that thousands of families depended upon. After 20 minutes, the sedan turned toward one of the tallest office towers in the financial district. Unlike Bennett Technologies, this building displayed no colorful branding or modern advertising screens. Polished stone walls, understated architecture, and discreet security reflected an organization that valued influence more than publicity. Before the car had fully stopped, two security officers approached and opened the entrance with immediate recognition. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," one of them said warmly. "Welcome back." Marcus thanked them and continued inside without slowing his pace. Employees passing through the marble lobby instinctively stepped aside, greeting him with genuine respect instead of surprise. Some had worked there for years without ever appearing in public beside him, yet every one of them understood the significance of his presence. An elevator requiring a restricted access card opened after Marcus slipped the small silver emblem from his jacket pocket. The doors closed silently before carrying him to the executive level. Evelyn stood beside him holding a digital tablet filled with overnight updates. "Several acquisition proposals arrived after yesterday's announcement," she explained. "Investment firms believe Bennett Technologies has become vulnerable." Marcus glanced briefly at the summaries before handing the tablet back. "No responses until after the meeting." Evelyn nodded. "Understood." The elevator doors opened onto a quiet corridor lined with historic photographs, documenting the growth of companies that had shaped entire industries. At the end of the hallway stood a pair of dark wooden doors guarded by another member of security. He opened them immediately. Inside, a long conference table stretched beneath soft lighting, surrounded by men and women whose combined experience represented decades of corporate leadership. Conversations stopped the instant Marcus entered the room. Every board member rose to their feet without being asked. No applause filled the room. No dramatic announcement interrupted the silence. Respect alone transformed the atmosphere. Marcus acknowledged each person with a calm nod before taking the chair at the head of the table. Evelyn placed the leather portfolio in front of him and quietly whispered, "Everyone is present." Marcus rested one hand on the unopened folder while his eyes moved steadily around the room. Outside, Vanessa was preparing for another ordinary day as chief executive officer, completely unaware that a meeting had already begun where the future of Bennett Technologies would be decided long before she received her first invitation to attend. Marcus waited until the last board member had returned to their seat before opening the leather portfolio resting in front of him. The room remained perfectly still. There was no need for introductions because everyone present already understood why they had gathered before sunrise. A silver-haired director adjusted his glasses and quietly slid a thick binder across the polished table. "The independent audit is complete," he said. "Every financial record has been verified." Marcus thanked him, with a slight nod before turning the first page. Detailed reports outlined aggressive expansion plans, executive compensation packages, vendor agreements, and internal restructuring decisions approved over the previous 18 months. None of the documents suggested fraud or criminal behavior. Instead, they revealed something more dangerous for a growing company. Short-term decisions had been replacing long-term vision. Experienced department leaders had quietly resigned. Product development budgets had been reduced while marketing expenses climbed to record levels. Employee retention had fallen to the lowest level since the company had opened its doors. Marcus closed the report without displaying frustration. "She built remarkable momentum," he said calmly. "No one should ignore that achievement." Several directors exchanged surprised glances. They had expected criticism after everything that had happened the day before. Instead, Marcus acknowledged Vanessa's strengths before discussing her mistakes. "However," he continued, "growth without balance eventually becomes instability. We built this company to last generations, not quarters." Evelyn distributed additional folders to every member of the board. Inside were comparisons between the original strategic plan created years earlier and the current operating direction. The differences were impossible to ignore. One director leaned forward. "Would you like us to begin replacing senior leadership immediately?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. Decisions made in anger rarely become good decisions." He looked around the table, making eye contact with every individual before speaking again. "Yesterday was personal. Today is business. Those two things must never become the same." The atmosphere changed almost instantly. Anxiety gave way to confidence because everyone recognized the discipline behind his words. Marcus reached for another folder containing confidential shareholder agreements. Several investment firms attempted to purchase controlling interests overnight, Evelyn explained. They assumed the company had become vulnerable after yesterday's announcement. Marcus smiled faintly. Decline every proposal. Already done, Evelyn answered. Excellent. Another board member cleared her throat before speaking. There is one more issue. Executive leadership believes the chief executive officer now has complete authority over all strategic decisions. Marcus rested both hands on the table. That misunderstanding ends today, but it ends with professionalism. No public embarrassment. No unnecessary conflict. We will follow the governance documents exactly as they were written. Legal counsel opened a bound copy of the corporate charter and turned to a page marked with a blue ribbon. Under Article 7, he said, the chairman retains authority to convene an emergency governance review whenever executive decisions present material long-term risk. Marcus nodded. Then we proceed according to the charter. Evelyn quietly checked the time displayed on her tablet. The formal notice has already been delivered to the executive office. The chief executive officer and senior leadership team have been instructed to attend a mandatory board session at 10 o'clock this morning. Marcus closed the portfolio once again and rose from his chair. Every director instinctively stood with him. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline shimmered beneath the bright morning sun, while far below, employees entered Bennett Technologies believing they were beginning another ordinary workday. None of them realized that, within the next hour, the balance of authority they had taken for granted would quietly shift inside a boardroom, where reputation mattered far less than responsibility, and where the man they believed had disappeared from the company was preparing to reveal only as much of the truth as the moment required. The formal notice reached Vanessa Bennett just after 9:30 that morning. She read it twice while standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office, her expression tightening ever so slightly at the unfamiliar wording. It was not a request for an update. It was not another routine strategy meeting. It was an emergency governance session called directly by the board of directors. She looked toward the chief financial officer, who had entered moments earlier carrying his own copy of the notice. Did anyone explain why this meeting was called? She asked. He slowly shook his head. No. Legal instructed everyone to attend immediately. They would not answer any questions. Vanessa folded the document with measured confidence. Then we will find out together. Throughout the executive floor, quiet conversations spread from office to office as department heads compared identical notices. Some assumed investors had forced an unexpected review after the previous day's highly publicized leadership changes. Others believed a merger proposal had surfaced overnight. No one mentioned Marcus aloud. In their minds, his departure had already become yesterday's news. Meanwhile, several floors below, employees continued answering customer calls, developing software, and attending project meetings without realizing the company's future was being quietly rewritten above them. Inside the boardroom, Marcus remained composed as the legal team reviewed the final agenda. Evelyn placed a fresh folder beside him. Attendance has been confirmed, she said softly. Every executive accepted the summons. Marcus thanked her before reading the final page. It contained no accusations, no emotional language, and no dramatic declarations. Every item referenced governance, fiduciary responsibility, succession authority, and long-term strategic oversight. Exactly as it should. One of the directors leaned toward Marcus. Some members of executive leadership may interpret today's meeting as retaliation. Marcus closed the folder and met the man's eyes. Then our conduct must give them no reason to believe that. The director nodded quietly. Calm leadership had always been Marcus's greatest strength. Even those who disagreed with him rarely questioned his discipline. At precisely 10 o'clock, the conference room doors opened one by one as senior executives entered with polite greetings that gradually faded into visible confusion. They expected to find the independent directors preparing for another quarterly review. Instead, they found every board member already seated with legal counsel present and confidential files arranged neatly across the polished table. An uneasy silence settled over the room as more executives arrived. Vanessa entered last, carrying herself with the confidence expected of a chief executive officer, though she immediately noticed something unusual. The chair reserved for the meeting's presiding officer remained occupied by someone positioned with his back partially toward the entrance. She could not immediately see his face. She assumed it was outside counsel or perhaps an investor representative invited to observe the proceedings. She took her assigned seat without speaking. Around the table, conversations disappeared completely. Even the quiet rustling of papers stopped. Evelyn stepped toward the front of the room and closed the doors with deliberate care before returning to her place beside the head chair. She looked briefly toward Marcus, waiting for a single acknowledgement. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Evelyn drew a calm breath before addressing everyone assembled. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady enough to command the room without raising its volume. "This emergency session of the Board of Directors is now officially in order. Before we proceed to the first resolution, the presiding chairman has requested that the corporate governance records be entered into the official minutes exactly as originally filed." At those words, every eye in the room shifted toward the man seated at the head of the table as he slowly turned his chair to face the executives for the very first time. Marcus Bennett slowly turned his chair until he faced the executives gathered around the long conference table. The silence that followed seemed to drain every sound from the room. Vanessa stared at him without blinking, convinced for a brief second that she was looking at someone she had imagined rather than someone sitting only a few feet away. Several executives instinctively looked from Marcus to the directors surrounding him, searching for an explanation that never came. Marcus did not smile. He did not display satisfaction or resentment. He simply rested both hands on the polished table and met every pair of eyes with the same calm expression they had known for years. Evelyn placed a bound copy of the corporate charter in front of Vanessa before quietly returning to her place beside Marcus. For the official record, legal counsel began. The board acknowledges the attendance of the founding chairman and controlling shareholder of Bennett Technologies. No one moved. The words seemed impossible to process. Vanessa lowered her eyes toward the charter before opening it with uncertain hands. Several pages had been marked with blue tabs. Her attention stopped on the first signature listed beneath the original incorporation documents. Marcus Bennett, founder, chairman of the board, controlling voting trustee. Her own signature appeared several pages later beneath an executive appointment agreement dated years after the company had been legally established. The room remained completely still as realization slowly spread from one executive to another. The chief financial officer quietly removed his glasses, reading the document again as though hoping he had misunderstood. Another vice president leaned back in disbelief, finally understanding why every board member had risen the moment Marcus entered earlier that morning. Vanessa looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Because leadership does not begin with a title. It begins with responsibility." His words carried no bitterness. They sounded more like a principle he had lived by for years than an explanation offered in self-defense. One of the independent directors spoke next. "Mr. Bennett voluntarily stepped away from daily executive operations 6 years ago to allow the chief executive officer complete authority over business execution while he retained governance responsibility under the corporate charter." Legal counsel opened another folder containing board resolutions signed years earlier. Every document confirmed the same structure. Marcus had intentionally chosen to remain outside the public spotlight while protecting the company's long-term direction from behind the scenes. Vanessa slowly closed the charter. Memories she had dismissed over the years suddenly returned with uncomfortable clarity. Investors who had accepted impossible negotiations after only one private phone call. Major financial institutions approving credit lines faster than competitors believed possible. Board recommendations that had always carried unusual confidence. She had assumed those successes resulted entirely from her own reputation. She now realized an invisible foundation had always been supporting the company beneath her feet. Marcus stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Morning sunlight reflected across the glass as thousands of employees continued their work below, completely unaware of what was unfolding above them. Without turning around, he spoke quietly enough that everyone leaned forward to hear him. "This meeting was never called because of yesterday." He paused before continuing. "Yesterday simply reminded me that I had waited long enough." He turned back toward the table, his expression unchanged. "Today is about protecting every employee, every customer, and every family that depends on this company. Personal disappointment has no place in this room." Those words settled heavily over the executives, because for the first time they understood that the meeting was not about revenge. It was about accountability, and every person seated at the table suddenly realized that the next decisions would determine far more than individual careers. No one expected the next sentence to become the moment they would remember for the rest of their careers. Marcus remained standing beside the conference table, his hands resting lightly on the back of the chair that had quietly waited for him all morning. He looked toward Evelyn, whose tablet already displayed the final governance resolutions approved only minutes earlier. Around the room, several executives exchanged uneasy glances, hoping the meeting would end with a warning rather than a decision. Vanessa remained silent. The confidence that had defined her entrance into the room had given way to careful observation. She was no longer trying to understand who Marcus was. She was trying to understand what kind of leader he had become while she believed he had disappeared. Marcus turned his attention toward the legal counsel. "Have all procedures been reviewed?" he asked. "Yes," counsel replied. "Every recommendation complies with the corporate charter, employment agreements, and board authority." Marcus nodded once before looking back at Evelyn. His voice remained calm, steady, and completely free of emotion. "Fire them all." The words landed softly, yet they carried more weight than anyone expected. Several executives instinctively looked toward Vanessa, assuming the order included her. It did not. Marcus immediately continued before confusion could spread. Every executive identified in the independent audit as placing personal influence above the long-term interests of this company will be relieved of duty today. Every separation will include the contractual compensation they have earned. Every transition will be handled respectfully. Security will assist only if assistance is requested. We will treat every departing employee with dignity. Relief mixed with disbelief spread through the room. This was not a purge driven by anger. It was a carefully prepared restructuring supported by months of documented evidence. Evelyn began reading the names one by one. They belonged to senior officers who had repeatedly ignored internal warnings, discouraged experienced managers from speaking honestly, and rewarded loyalty to individuals instead of responsibility to the organization. One executive lowered his head without argument. Another quietly closed his notebook, realizing the audit had documented decisions he believed no one had noticed. None of them protested because every recommendation had been supported by facts rather than opinions. Vanessa listened without interrupting. As each name was read, she remembered conversations she had dismissed, concerns she had postponed, and talented employees who had quietly resigned after their advice had been ignored. She finally understood that Marcus had not assembled the board because of their divorce. The investigation had begun long before either of them signed those papers. Yesterday had merely forced the truth into the open. Marcus waited until the final resolution had been entered into the official record before speaking again. "Leadership is never measured by how many people agree with you," he said. "It is measured by whether people feel safe enough to disagree with you." His eyes moved across the remaining executives. "If anyone sitting in this room believes your position protects you from accountability, today should remove that illusion. If you believe your contribution protects this company, prove it through your work, not your title." The atmosphere inside the boardroom changed in ways no organizational chart could ever capture. Fear slowly gave way to clarity because everyone understood the same standard now applied equally to every person present. Marcus then turned toward Vanessa for the first time since revealing his identity. His expression remained composed, neither cold nor forgiving. "The meeting is not over," he said quietly. "There is one final decision that concerns only the two of us." Every person in the room realized the most personal conversation of the day had not yet begun, and no one could predict what Marcus would choose to do next. The last executive quietly left the boardroom, and the heavy doors closed with a soft click that finally separated corporate business from personal history. Only Marcus, Vanessa, Evelyn, legal counsel, and the independent directors remained. Marcus looked toward the board members before offering a respectful nod. "Thank you," he said. "The remaining conversation is private." One by one, they gathered their folders and departed without a single unnecessary word. Within moments, the enormous conference room that had felt crowded only minutes earlier became almost silent. Chicago's skyline stretched beyond the windows, bright beneath the late morning sun, while the city below continued moving as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Vanessa remained seated, her hands resting quietly on the polished table. For the first time in years, she seemed unsure how to begin speaking. Marcus waited patiently, giving her the same courtesy he had extended throughout the meeting. Eventually, she broke the silence. "How long have you been watching everything?" she asked softly. Marcus answered without hesitation. "Long enough to know the company was losing its direction. Not long enough to stop every mistake before it happened." Vanessa lowered her eyes. "You could have told me who you really were." Marcus folded his hands together. "I wanted a partner who believed in building something together, not someone who stayed because of my position." The honesty in his voice carried no accusation. It sounded like a lesson learned through experience rather than regret. Vanessa slowly nodded as memories returned one after another. She remembered nights when Marcus had suggested slowing expansion so employees could be properly trained. She remembered conversations about protecting company culture before chasing another round of rapid growth. She remembered dismissing those ideas because quarterly numbers looked stronger than patience. At the time, she believed ambition alone would solve every challenge. "I thought I was leading," she admitted quietly. "I did not realize I had stopped listening." Marcus looked toward the city outside the windows before answering. Confidence becomes dangerous when it refuses to hear uncomfortable truth. The room fell silent again. Vanessa drew a slow breath before asking the question she had been avoiding since seeing his name on the original incorporation papers. "Why did you leave the daily operation in my hands if you knew you could have run everything yourself?" Marcus smiled faintly, though sadness rested behind it. "Because leadership cannot be borrowed. It has to be earned. I believed you could become the leader this company deserved if you had room to grow." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. "Instead, I believed every success belonged only to me." Marcus did not disagree. He simply let the truth remain between them without making it heavier. After several quiet moments, he opened a thin folder that had remained untouched throughout the meeting and slid it gently across the table. Vanessa looked down with visible surprise. It was not a termination letter. It was a revised executive development plan approved by the board. Independent mentors, quarterly governance reviews, and operational accountability had all been outlined in remarkable detail. "You are keeping me?" she asked, unable to hide her disbelief. Marcus nodded once. "The board removed people who placed themselves above the company. I do not believe you belong in that category. You made serious mistakes, but I still believe you can become the leader I once hoped you would be." Vanessa looked at him for a long time before quietly asking, "After everything that happened between us, why would you still trust me with this responsibility?" Marcus answered with complete sincerity. "Because forgiveness and responsibility are not enemies. I can forgive what happened between us while still believing you are capable of becoming better. The company deserves your best version, not your worst moment." Vanessa felt tears gathering but made no attempt to hide them. For the first time since signing the divorce papers, she understood that the greatest act of strength Marcus had shown was never hiding his authority. It was refusing to use that authority to destroy someone who still had the ability to change. And as she looked down at the folder resting before her, she realized the most difficult decision of her life was no longer whether she could remain chief executive officer, but whether she could become worthy of the trust she had almost thrown away. 1 year later, the atmosphere inside Bennett Technologies felt remarkably different from the company Marcus Bennett had quietly returned to protect. The executive floor no longer echoed with hurried decisions made to impress investors before the next quarterly report. Conference room doors remained open more often. Department leaders spoke honestly without fearing disagreement, and employee retention had climbed to its highest level since the company's earliest years. The changes had not happened overnight, and no single announcement had transformed the culture. They had been built one decision at a time, guided by accountability instead of ego. Vanessa Bennett remained chief executive officer, but the woman who walked through the headquarters each morning no longer resembled the executive who had once believed authority alone defined leadership. She visited engineering teams before attending investor meetings. She listened more than she spoke. She regularly invited junior employees to challenge strategic proposals, remembering Marcus's quiet reminder that people needed to feel safe enough to disagree. The company had become stronger not because one person controlled every answer, but because many voices were finally being heard. Marcus rarely occupied the executive offices anymore. Although he continued serving as chairman, he spent much of his time traveling to universities, technology incubators, and nonprofit organizations, encouraging young entrepreneurs to build businesses with character before chasing recognition. Public interviews remained rare because he still believed meaningful work required far less attention than the modern world demanded. Whenever journalists asked how Bennett Technologies had recovered so quickly after its difficult transition, Marcus always gave the same answer. Healthy organizations grow when people choose responsibility over pride. He never mentioned the boardroom. He never mentioned the divorce. He never tried to rewrite history in his own favor. On a bright autumn afternoon, the company gathered inside its renovated innovation center for the dedication of a new scholarship program, supporting first-generation college students pursuing careers in technology and business leadership. Employees, community leaders, and university partners filled the auditorium as Marcus stepped quietly onto the stage. Behind him, a simple screen displayed the name of the initiative, the Bennett Future Leaders Scholarship. There were no oversized portraits, no dramatic music, and no celebration of individual success. Marcus thanked the employees whose dedication had rebuilt trust throughout the organization before inviting Vanessa to join him at the podium. She accepted the invitation with genuine humility. Looking across the audience, she spoke with a confidence that no longer depended on appearing perfect. The greatest lesson I have learned is that leadership is not about proving you are the smartest person in the room, she said. It is about creating a room where everyone has the opportunity to contribute their best. Marcus smiled quietly, recognizing those words not as something she had borrowed from him, but as wisdom she had earned herself. After the ceremony ended, they stood outside overlooking the Chicago River while employees laughed together nearby. There was no discussion about rebuilding their marriage because both understood that some chapters belonged to the past. They had forgiven each other, but forgiveness did not require returning to the life they once shared. Instead, they had discovered something different. Mutual respect had survived where pride had failed. As the afternoon sunlight reflected across the water, Marcus looked toward the city that had witnessed both their greatest mistakes and their greatest growth. He realized success had never been hidden inside boardroom titles, controlling shares, or executive offices. Real success was walking away from bitterness without carrying it into tomorrow. Vanessa quietly thanked him for believing she could become better even when she had stopped believing in him. Marcus simply nodded before continuing down the river walk, leaving the future open before both of them. Sometimes the strongest leader is not the one who wins every battle or receives every headline. Sometimes the strongest leader is the one who quietly protects what matters most, gives others the chance to grow, and leaves behind a legacy measured not by power, but by the lives made better because they chose integrity over pride.